even though the technology has evolved dramatically, the human aspect of this is still pretty much the same. Um, First, understand what the real problems are that your customers have, and you know, uh, the idea for me is like ideas are naive, right? But problems have a lot of wisdom in them. It's very easy for somebody to have an idea that they can use generative AI to do this thing, but it may not be a real problem that anybody has. And they're not taking the time to actually understand the problem and to learn the wisdom that that problem has to teach them. And so I feel like the companies that are being more successful with this are really understanding those problems and spending a lot of time with the problem, and then figuring out how they can use the generative AI or whatever tool makes the best sense to solve that problem and to really address those needs.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the DXC stage. I'm so delighted today to welcome Matthew Holloway, who is the VP Global Head of Design at SnapLogic, a generative integration platform. Matthew, welcome as we expand more on design executive perspectives on AI.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about your background. What are some key roles you've held as a leader and your experience with AI today in your organization?
So, for the last 10 years, I've been focused primarily with early stage startup companies in the machine learning and generative AI space. Prior to that, I was at companies like SAP running a transformation team around design, and also in the consumer space at companies like Shutterfly and Apple running design teams for those organizations as well.
You mentioned you've been working on AI for quite some time now. Like, what have you seen over the years of development, as someone who's worked in the space?
Well, I mean, initially getting into it, and the cutting edge technology was machine learning, and the compared to the capabilities that we have today, it really seems very primitive by comparison to what we're able to pull off today with the generative AI, especially with the LLM based agents that can perform autonomous uh, very heterogeneous tasks that are very diverse and constantly evolving and changing, and those agents can keep pace with those changes. Um, Previously, just being able to apply machine learning to recognizing a pattern, let alone perform the task, was a burden. Now it's pretty easy to by comparison. I mean, it's still not perfect, and my colleagues in the data science space would say I was being overly optimistic, but I think comparatively speaking, it's much easier to do it today.
Hmm. Your company's, called a generative integration platform. I'm certain audiences are curious what that is.
Yeah,
Uh, could have something like this been possible years ago, or is this something more of a recent development?
this is a very recent. It's a very recent development. SnapLogic has been doing data integration for a number of years, and so at a very simple level, data integration is taking data either from applications or platforms and moving them to a different location, and along the way, doing a transformation on that data, or doing the transformation after you've loaded it into the, the destination. And along the way, you can, there's APIs and there's, other components that you can bring into play. And our platform does all of that. But in the last 2 years, especially with generative AI, we have moved into the space of being able to create those integrations automatically through prompts. And so you can ask our system to calculate the change in the price of the euro over the last 4 months and its impact on your supply chain costs. And we can automatically take that prompt and turn it into a data integration that will deliver those results to you. And then on top of that, we've recently added the ability for our customers to make their own agents with our agent creator tool. And so you can create on the SnapLogic platform, you can create an agent that will perform these heterogeneous tasks very autonomously to the point where they can actually reframe their prompts based on changes on your data profile. So
Mm.
as your data source evolves and your data structure is changing, these prompts can then respond to those changes and update themselves to be able to create the results that you're looking for.
We'll definitely get into agent-based design later in this interview. As we know, just coming back from the Fortune Brainstorm Design Conference, like that was a big topic our panel was covering, and I think design leaders at large need to quickly speed up on what that new dimension of interface design is. So let's come back to that. So audiences kind of get to know you personally. Is how are you using AI tools in your day-to-day today? Like how much are you using it from a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being almost everything? Like give us a bit of context.
I would say day to day, it's about a 3.5 to 4. I mean, you know, being an executive in a company, like the hands-on work is as much as the meetings and the conversations and kind of the negotiations with your colleagues around things. But when I do have to sit down and create something from scratch, um, I find the generative tools, ChatGPT, Dolly, like all the standard tools everyone uses, I find those to be incredibly valuable. Um, Sometimes for the actual creating the words, but more than often it's about the outline. And so, being able to type in a prompt for, I'm working on a proposal. What are some key things I should do for this domain and this topic? And it will, generate a list of things in an outline. And it's like 80% of those, I'm like, yep, got it, got it, got it, got it. Ooh, that's a good idea. Like the last 20%, those are really insightful things that I probably wouldn't have thought of right away. It may have come up in a review process or something, but it just kind of uh, really is like a really smart assistant.
Mm. I think for those who can't see your background, you're clearly a painter and an artist. How do you feel about this from that angle?
It's the IP and the copyright issues are a challenge for a lot of artists. There have been cases where graphic artists have had their portfolios or illustrators have had their portfolios uploaded into LLMs uh, without their permission, and then people use that to generate work that looks just like their work, and it cuts them out of the loop, and they get no royalties for that work, or so that's hugely problematic. I think for some pieces, the rapid creation of an image can be really fun. The thing that I find missing from a lot of those is the deeper kind of semantics around the artwork. The narrative component of the artwork isn't as present as it is when
Mm,
it's done by a human. I think, at least I haven't seen systems be able to recreate that.
mm,
And a lot of it is assembling work from prior work of other people. It's like that's what it does, right? And so it could take 50 portraits, a very small sample set. It's probably more like 50,000 portraits, and say like this is what a portrait looks like if you ask it to create one. But it wouldn't necessarily capture the same emotional um, inner inner being of the subject that a
hmm
human would be able to do. So
Yeah, I think there's a spiritual component almost to what the humans can create, and can AI replicate that?
mhm.
I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your characterization of the current state of AI and kind of the zeitgeist. Clearly, we're seeing enormous capital flows into generative AI tools, agent AI tools. What are you kind of feeling about the state of things? Because I know you also grew up in another era where mobile, social, the internet was all coming to life. So, how
Yeah.
do you feel about the current era versus the prior?
Well, I feel like the novelty of being able to have a conversation with one of these things is quickly wearing off in terms of uh, the results that you're getting back. And so, um, one coworker described it as having the same conversation that he has with his 5-year-old, where you basically have to re-explain it and re-explain it and re-explain it. And by the time you're done, it would have been faster for you to do it yourself.
Hmm
Um, and unlike the 5-year-old who benefits from that, from a learning and development perspective, it's not that the time you spend with your favorite agent is really worth investing in that conversation. Um, and I think that from a UX perspective, the conversational paradigm is still very much based on like what we're seeing in terms of the experience that you have with this is really based on pre-existing models. Um, it hasn't evolved into a new interaction with the technology. One of the startups I was at, we were looking at ways of passively collecting behavioral data from people and then providing automations on their behalf for things based on just watching their behaviors. Um, and initially, a lot of people felt this was very invasive, but then they started seeing the payoff, and they're like, "Okay, I trust you guys. You're doing the right thing. You're not merchandising my data,
Mm.
but you are helping me become more efficient, and you're kind of anticipating my needs, which is really promising." And that was just based on the machine learning capabilities, not even on the Gen AI things that we have to work with now. Um, and so I feel like those types of advances haven't yet come to fruition in terms of what the generative AI capabilities are really going to deliver in terms of that experience. Um, like you're still entering things with a mouse and a keyboard and looking at them on a screen and typing, and it's reading, and that isn't really a novel experience that really leverages, I think, the full potential of this technology.
You probably have a lot of visibility into how a variety of companies in different industry sectors are implementing AI. What do you kind of see as a fruitful approach to successful AI implementation versus maybe some mistakes or pitfalls that you're commonly seeing in companies? I'd love to hear your vision on that.
I think um, you shared an article from Rand about some of the pitfalls people are experiencing with the generative AI tools, and they're similar to problems people have had with any new emerging technology coming out. There's an overhype of its potential and its capabilities, and then when you go to build it, there's this big disappointment in terms of what it's actually capable of doing. And so, one of the things that we've noticed is that if you can get in early with the design team to actually prototype the the capabilities of that system against the problem you're trying to solve, you can reset those expectations. And so, while they may say, "Oh, it's not ready to do all the stuff I want it to do," I can still see value in what it can do today. And so, it helps ease them into that. Uh, the adoption of that technology and ease them into kind of the acceptance of what it can do, so that they can try it and grow with it as its capabilities expand.
Mm.
I think most of the companies are looking at automating existing workflows and existing tasks. Of course, there's the most common thing is reducing customer support interactions with humans, making those more cost effective, and being able to at least have the first wave of contact through an automated agent to resolve those issues. The those work pretty well. As you get into more complex workflows, like closing your books at the end of the month, for example. Internally, we have an agent that we're piloting to do that with our finance team, and they love it because it takes a task that somebody would have to spend many days working on, and getting it down to a couple hours. The agents can work across all the different backend tools and all the different systems and pull data from all the different sources, aggregate it, put it together, and put it into the accounting system at the end. And it's you know good to go for the most part.
Mm.
And so the more structured the task, even more routine, I should say, the task, even if it's a very heterogeneous task and use different systems and different platforms, the agents are very competent at being able to do that today.
So, when I think about digital agents and, increasing autonomy of being able to complete tasks from basic to more advanced to more even comprehensive work, like closing the books, what do you kind of see as, and I think, leaders are kind of curious, like, how does that all work? How are teams being restructured or new roles emerging? How are those guidelines and policies and prompts really being set? So, kind of curious to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing as a design executive and how some of those cross-functional dynamics are changing.
The one thing that I've noticed is the companies who uh, can move to break down their silos faster are having more success.
Mm.
And so a lot of times there's this old saying, most of life's disappointments can be traced back to a mismatch of expectations. And I feel like that happens frequently with these types of solutions where the business stakeholders may have one set of expectations based on something they read in an op-ed piece somewhere about, these agents can do anything and they're magical, versus the folks, actually building out these systems for them in their IT departments or their engineering departments that are very pragmatic about what's actually doable and what it's capable of actually performing. And the closer you can bring those two people together, the better it is in terms of setting that expectation and making sure that the agents are going to deliver what the business really needs, and that they're stable and scalable, and you can actually trust them to perform autonomously,
Mm.
so that there's no kind of surprise that something didn't happen or something did happen that was unexpected.
Mm.
Um, so I think those tend to be much more successful. I think also a lot of times the the business stakeholders with the generative AI piece are more likely to be informed about what the generative AI capabilities are than with some of the previous technologies. Like with mobile, everyone's like, I need a mobile app. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I need a mobile app. And now they're like, hey, have this Gen AI technology can do this and this and this. And I've read about this and it can do that. And we can have this LLM and it can do that. And so more people are kind of aware of its capabilities than with, I think,
Mm.
previous technologies.
So you're saying almost with this era of a tool being even more accessible than the prior, generation, you're kind of saying there's going to be more opinionated leaders demanding requirements, use cases, etc. Is that kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
or at least more informed.
More informed.
I think, um, you know, unlike like when mobile took off and everybody had to have a mobile app, it was just I need a mobile app, and it wasn't there wasn't that initial awareness of you can't just take your existing solution and cram it onto a phone. It has to be scaled to the device based on the context that people will be using it in and pulling their phone out to do that thing. They're not going to be sitting at home. They're not going to be sitting in their office. They're going to be on a bus. They're going to be in the back of a cab. They're going to be walking down the street. The experience has to map to that context. All of those nuances were very latent in terms of an executive's understanding of what they were asking for. I feel like with generative AI, more has been published and is more available for those executives to make more informed decisions, and to really understand what they're asking for and have a better um, sense of what it's capable of doing. They're still probably thinking it can do more than it can in some cases, but I feel like the middle level of the management is probably more informed than they were previously. The C-level guys may still be hoping it can do more, but even there, we're finding a lot of the C-level executives are pretty well informed about what generative AI is capable of doing. Um, there's still, that mismatch of expectations in terms of the hype cycle,
Hmm.
and we are kind of on the downward slope of the hype cycle. But I feel like the trough may not be as deep as it has been on previous technologies. Uh, it's looking more promising, I think,
Hmm. So you're almost hinting at there's maybe more staying power with generative AI value.
or at least the depth of that trough. Sometimes it's so deep, some organizations never come out of it. They just abandon that technology. I feel like that slope in this case may be easier for
Hmm.
people to get over. The the um, the level of understanding people are bringing to it, as well as the rate of evolution in the technology, um, is making it much easier.
From a design perspective, I assume when we all got that access to ChatGPT and the fact that it was so accessible to almost anyone
Mhm.
probably played a very big role in what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think initially there was folks who were like, yeah, just like I type in a thing and it gives me back an answer. Okay, that's great. Like, so what? And it took some examples going beyond just that simple capability of writing a letter, or I need to write an email to somebody and I don't know what to say. Like, what do I say? Um, Going beyond that into like more of the agentic model where these things are capable of performing autonomous actions on your behalf, and even just the richness at which it can write, and the hallucinations still occur, but they're occurring less frequently than they were previously. And with the agent component to them, they're much more reliable.
Mm.
I wouldn't say they're 100% yet, but uh, people are much more trusting of the agents that they're creating. On our platform, especially, people are very happy with the agents that we're able to create for them. Um, and so I think, it's evolving at a faster rate, and that people are more they have a better understanding of what it's capable of doing. But definitely that hands-on experience up front, I think, made it much easier for people to kind of understand what this thing was capable of.
Mm.
Um,
I even think about, the personification of AI, right? The personality layer, how they respond to you and the ability to customize it as another dimension of how it feels more natural, maybe. How do you think about the evolving role of the designer in this age? In the last few decades, we designed screens, a lot of buttons and clicks and colors and components and pixels. So, what's shifting to this next era? What skills are we looking at that need to upskill? And what does that shape of the new designer look like?
well, I think one of the big areas is that last year there was this thing about like prompt engineering as this new specialty for data scientists. And at the time, I'm like, well, that means there's going to be prompt designers as well, and that really understanding how to create an effective prompt is
Hmm.
going to be an important part of making sure your generative AI solution is effective. Um, and it's not just words. The prompt should also include context and behaviors and gestures and frequency and other patterns of use to really tailor that response to that individual. And so I think design for a very long time has employed, tools from anthropology to understand and observe people in contexts. And I feel like that's still going to apply to this as well. And I think the challenge is that oftentimes the engineers building the back end system are just as far removed from the users as they've ever been. When a engineer builds a technology in isolation from the people using it, it still happens. And so the designer still has to bring the human into the equation and say, okay, so the prompt that you're thinking of is not the way that people actually talk. It's not the phrasing they use. It's not how they describe this stuff. So you've got to make sure that people can create prompts either explicitly or implicitly that satisfies their need and solves the problem that they need. I think that's going to be a big shift for designers. It's not about it's expanding their understanding of human perception and cognition to include other things other than just vision, which has been the primary interaction. Accessibility has been primarily focused on the readability of the screen, but I think moving forward, accessibility is going to include a lot more aspects of diversity around language and verbal skills and a lot of other things in terms of being able to make that solution inclusive.
Is it correct to say it's almost like the broadening of the five senses role in designer skill sets beyond just I see and how I click, but now how I listen, how, audio respond, right? Is that kind of what you're hinting at?
Yeah, and also, am I moving? Am I sitting still? Is it,
Hmm.
how is it? How is it interacting with me? With the inclusion of body sensors and other stuff as an input for the prompt, you could also take into account their physical state as well as their just what they're typing.
As you're saying this, I thought about I've been traveling a lot, and at the airports in Asia, they heat scan you to kind of see if you're sick.
Hmm.
It made me also think about, right now for ChatGPT and tools, it doesn't really use video, right? So based on what you're saying, I imagine maybe even the next 2.0 of Gen AI is not only can I text or talk, but it can now see me and maybe even detect mood.
Possibly, yeah. Um, and I think along with that also is the flip side of that is the output.
Hmm.
And so, based on somebody's mood, uh, you know, if you've ever been in a relationship, you can tell when your partner is upset, and you change the length of your response and the tone of your response. And sometimes they just want a short answer, and sometimes they want a longer explanation. And if you mess those two things up, you're probably gonna.
You're toast.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's an opportunity for these systems to also learn that about the people using them as well,
Mm.
which is in this context, this is the type of response you would prefer. In this context, you would prefer this other response. So, if I ask, if I use my Apple Watch or my phone to interact with one of these systems, the same way that it took a long time for people to realize it's like, hey, when you're walking to a restaurant and you want to know where the restaurant is, you don't want to see 47 reviews. You don't want to see pictures of the food. You want to know exactly like how many steps you go, and do you turn left? Do you turn right? Like, are you doing the right thing here? And I feel like the responses for the Gen AI tools need to have that same level of adaptability
Mm.
to context.
What's interesting is, in the design and UX space, we often measure things like task to completion, right, or time to completion. And I think about, does AI experiences give us a faster or even maybe more enjoyable path to completion because it's now conversational?
Perhaps. Think about it. It depends on who you're having the conversation with, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's really frustrating.
And sometimes I don't want to take the most efficient path.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Well,
sometimes, like the one I like is, I've been accused in my writing of uh, you know, not lowering the bar enough for people to make it easy for people to follow what I'm saying, which I take as a compliment. But some of the folks are like, you're being a little too professorial here. And so sometimes if I run a paragraph through, one of these tools to get some feedback on it, it's like, no, I want that sentence that complex. I want to use a semicolon because I like them, and I think it's important that we don't forget how to write. And so uh, sometimes it's like I wanted to learn that about me, that
hmm.
like I love Hemingway and I love writing like Hemingway, but every once in a while, a little different would be a little different.
Right. And how do you see, as businesses adopt Gen AI tools and integrate it even deeper and deeper into their operations, their portfolio of solutions, what sort of early signs of business value are you seeing versus maybe some more long tail effects as a result of having those integrations?
So I think initially it's some of the biggest business values that we're seeing is people are actually able to uh, fully like get the full value out of the data that they have. A lot of these companies have so much information, so much data. They don't necessarily know all the stuff they have. They don't know what its value really is and what they can really do with it. And so being able to provide both the integration tools to begin with, but then adding the generative aspect to that, just being able to really get the full value out of the data that you have, and really being able to put that into practice. Where before your data may be sitting, some sales data may be sitting in one system and some support information may be sitting in another system. And it's up to, a couple humans to pull those two things together. With these types of tools, you can not only pull that information together in one place, but then you can also create an understanding of what that information means. And more importantly, with the agents, you can transfer that understanding into an action. And so it can make recommendations for resolving potential issues or
Mm.
escalations, or kind of really leveraging its understanding of that information to the benefit of your business.
I think what's interesting is over the last, year and a half, we've seen every company try to deploy some sort of generative AI feature in their products and services. Some were successful, some not so much. Um, what are you kind of feeling about that bit of business value? Because I think every company has raced to do this.
Yeah,
And I think some were a lot lazier than others in terms of the thoughtfulness. What
yeah.
do you recommend companies to do differently to ensure a higher success rate of AI rollout?
Well, I think it's even though the technology has evolved dramatically, the human aspect of this is still pretty much the same. Um, First, understand what the real problems are that your customers have, and you know the idea for me is, like, ideas are naive, right? But problems have a lot of wisdom in them.
Mm,
It's very easy for somebody to have an idea that they can use generative AI to do this thing, but it may not be a real problem that anybody has. And they're
mm.
not taking the time to actually understand the problem and to learn the wisdom that that problem has to teach them. And so I feel like the companies that are being more successful with this are really understanding those problems and spending a lot of time with the problem, and then figuring out how they can use the generative AI or whatever tool makes the best sense to solve that problem and to really address those needs.
So I think what's so frustrating and yet profound to me is someone who's listened to so many design executives talk. We are all drilling roughly the same points of obsess over the problem, really understand the person, and then you can solve it really well.
Mhm.
But I think general human behavior, especially in business, what we've seen is tech chasing, over exuberance on a technology without deeply thinking about it. So why do we keep seeing this play out again and again and again? How much resources and waste have we created as a result? If we could not have just stepped back a little bit, and why aren't companies leveraging the perspectives of design leaders more if that is true? Like what's this gap here that we keep seeing?
Well, I think from some of the conversations I've had with leaders from different companies, um, many of them aspire to be like Steve Jobs. And they will tell you, Steve never did user research on the iPhone. Steve never did user research on iTunes. And it's like, yes and no. Like, Steve had a high degree of empathy, believe it or not, with the people who used his products. And he had a very deep understanding of what they were doing and the pain points that they had. And he was very tuned in to creating a solution that solved their problem. He didn't They didn't do all the classic kind of card sorting and post walls of post-it notes and endless user interviews and all that kind of stuff. But they still followed a very human-centric process. Um, and I feel like the there's enough leaders out there who feel like they could be the next Steve Jobs, and they approach these problems with a little more confidence than what they probably are entitled to. And then it doesn't work because they really don't understand it, and they also don't iterate on it enough, and they don't rapidly improve based on the feedback that they have. And They also don't necessarily have the resources to bury their mistakes so well, because Apple made mistakes, but no one ever talks about them because they buried them super, super well. And uh, so I think there's a little bit of that, but uh, I think it's also just people fall in love with the idea,
Hmm.
and
Ideas are very seductive.
ideas are so seductive,
Yeah.
and they're so much fun, and they are just high fructose corn syrup. you know, and you still got to eat the nutritional stuff, and that's
I think it's so funny about this conversation is, we as designers ourselves can also fall trapped to that natural human behavior of like probably that dopamine we get from the creative process, the ideation. But to really sit thoughtfully in a problem is not always the most fun because it can be really heavy too, right? Because
and it can be very lonely.
and very, yeah, absolutely. So when I listen to what you say, I almost see, from our DXC summit, we also talked about the importance of ego-free leadership, right? In being human-centered. Now, that's not always the most natural place I think we as leaders start from.
Right.
So, is hubris getting in the way of great products, companies, outcomes for all of us? A little
Uh,
bit.
yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, um, we have a one of the mantras we use at SnapLogic is truth before ego,
Hmm.
and we remind each other of that a lot.
Hmm.
So if we do fall in love with an idea, um, we make sure that we're just not falling in love with that idea, and that it's not our ego, but that it's really true.
That's a great point.
Um, and I think it helps when you have the psychological safety and the culture of the organization ensures that people questioning, are you just in love with the idea? Is that why we're doing this, or is it really
Hmm.
solving a real problem? I think that becomes a critical part of your success.
Hmm.
And that starts with leadership and being having a CEO who's willing to be questioned, and accepting of that question. I think is really critical.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you find, with that concept of truth before, is it truth before ego?
Yeah.
Do you find that you have your CEO's support on that value?
Oh yeah. Very much so. Yeah. In fact, he's often the one who brings that up.
It's great.
Like when and it can be on any number of fronts. So
Mm.
yeah.
What do you think is perhaps one of the most important roles design leaders can play in this new era, knowing what we just said? How can they really drive that cultural change to generate the sponsorship, the champions of concepts like that, so that we can really focus on solving problems for humans rather than tech chasing, right? What do you think are some actionable things that designers can do and design leaders can do if they don't yet have that kind of support?
I think you know it's kind of going back to the basics, I guess, for design. But one of the most powerful tools I still use today is just prototypes. And so when somebody has an idea and says, this technology will do this great thing and it'll solve this do and it'll just be fabulous, I'm like, great, show it to me. Like, show me what that experience is going to be. Show me how that's going to work. Walk me through the back end architecture of it. What components are going to be there? How is this data going to like move through the system and do the stuff that you're promising it can do? And if they can't, it's not about building the system before it's proven to be valuable. It's basically just showing it enough in a tangible enough way to basically say, okay, so what you're asking people to do are these 18 steps. No one's going to do that. Like, get it down to 3 steps and we'll talk.
Mm.
And really being able to make it tangible and have that conversation, it takes it out of the you and me mode to the that thing on the whiteboard is what we're talking about,
Yeah.
and we're solving it. And by the way, the problem is sitting over here, and we have to get to the solution for that problem. And nothing we have on the whiteboard right now is actually solving
Mm.
that problem.
And what would you say in the other side of it is what can CEOs and C-level leaders do to build an AI ready culture where innovation is much more rooted in problem solving than, wasteful innovation? Like what can they do from the business side?
Um, Probably, two things. One of them isn't really surprising, which is make sure that people in your company spend as much time with your customers as possible. That is probably the most important thing. And designers don't always even love to spend as much time with their customers as they should. And engineers even tend to be a little more introverted and
Mhm.
not wanting to spend time with customers. But the more time you can spend with the customer, the better. The other piece of it is to help your team become as informed as possible about this technology. And so it's just like any other material that you work with, you have to understand the nature of that material. And so, um, back in the day, Charles and Ray Eames like played with plywood, and they built their Kazam machine, and they could steam press plywood into different shapes, and that's how we have the iconic Eames lounge chairs, because they played with the material.
Hmm.
And so today, for example, two of the folks on my team are doing. One of them just finished an MIT class on generative AI. The other one's taking one at Stanford, and these are designers, and they're taking these courses on generative AI to really learn, how this technology works, and to gain enough knowledge so they can continue to
Hmm.
grow and to continue to kind of learn as it emerges.
Right.
And so I think really prioritizing those two things, understand the material, understand the people you're building for, and bringing those two things together.
So it sounds like there's a really important role for the business leaders and anyone who sets maybe the funding of L&D. Is what is that tangible benefit to upskill your employees, right? Especially as so many shifts are coming. So I actually wonder if we did a study of what the upskilling initiatives and incentives are right now, like how would that look like to get an AI ready workforce? Because it sounds like some of your designers are already taking a step ahead to get themselves equipped.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And other folks on my team are, they've been following AI for a very long time, just personally, and so they're already very familiar with it. They know where, like when generative AI first started coming out, one of my designers was able to basically go toe to toe with our, data science folks on. Okay, so that's what it says, but this is the way it actually works, which means it can't do what
Mm.
it's promising, and this is why. And so we shouldn't talk about it in those terms. And they it was really nice being able to have informed conversations where you could follow through on that truth before ego
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, where uh, like it wasn't just like I have a PhD in computer science, I'm smart. It's like, yeah, but this is what the technology is capable of. This is
Right.
what the material can do. And so,
So let's talk about this in the last few minutes here. Is your team's already upskilling on certain areas.
mhm,
I think there's maybe always some nervousness and anxiety when it comes to change, and especially if it comes to our jobs. And I think design professionals around the world are kind of a little anxious or wondering, but some are also optimistic. So, what do you kind of see over the next few years of how design organizations are going to change or evolve, and what do you kind of want to leave audiences with a little bit of what are some quick guidances they can actionably take on to really future proof themselves?
I think it's not losing sight of the basics around what design does and how we solve problems, and understanding that this technology is just a new material that we're working with. The same way that mobile was a new material, or the
Hmm.
internet was a new material, or social networks were new. They're not. They're not going to. If you sit still and don't do anything, then it'll feel like it left you behind because you stopped moving. But I feel like as long as the designers are maintaining an understanding of this technology as it emerges and changes, and they are looking for ways of applying it to solve these real problems, and looking at it as a, like with prompts, prompts aren't just words in a text field. Like prompts can be so many other things. It's any type of input
Hmm.
that can go in, and like breaking down that kind of preconception is something designers historically have been really good at. But I feel like a number of designers right now are just frozen by this fear
Hmm.
that the system can now generate an image, and oh my god, that image looks a lot like a wireframe that I would create myself, and then they just freeze, right? So they have to get beyond that and say, like, great, so this things can do wireframes now. Let's move on. Like,
Mm.
when I started design, everything was by hand with technical pins and rulers, and then the computer came along, and everybody, like, oh my god, my job is over because the computer can do all this now. It's like, no, just transfer your skills into that.
Right.
And
I
so,
mean, if those sentiments and fears were true, you wouldn't be in the job you are today. So I think a little bit like over the next, 2 to 3 decades, as this really rolls out and transforms our lives, is we got to stay nimble and we got to stay adaptive to the changing times. And
mhm,
I've been watching a lot of Dune lately because the new series is out, and I'm like, fear's the mind killer, and like we cannot let that fear cripple us. To your point, and so I think this is so important because I think I've just seen so much kind of fear out there in the kind of discourse, and I think it's so important for us to remind ourselves about the power we do have to make
right,
an action, right?
right. There's the other, Dune. Frank Herbert has the other great quote that I just forgot. But if you do a search for Frank Herbert and AI, he has this great quote about
Mm.
AI. But it's not about the AI. It's our giving up basically. And
Which ties into our very last question here is there a movie, book, or story that gives you inspiration for a future to prevent or create between humans and machines? And what would that be?
uh, it's funny we were saying that. The first one that came to mind was Severance.
I watched that. It's not great.
Yeah, it's not a happy ending. Yeah. I feel like it's very easy to write dystopian futures around AI, right? And the thinking machines and Terminator and all that kind of stuff. And when you see videos from companies like Boston Dynamics with their dog, running over terrain and doing all sorts of stuff, it's like, yeah, you could like it's very easy to paint a very dystopian future. Um, but there's counter to that you have Star Trek, right,
Hmm.
where they have this great symbiotic relationship with the computer that is their ship. It like runs everything and it understands based on lots of nonverbal, non-spoken, non-explicit cues what their intent is and what they're looking for and can anticipate things. Um, and so that's a much more optimistic view of where technology could go.
Hmm.
So
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's create that Star Trek future. And it's, I think, all within our hands as designers to be creative and not lose sight of the power that we all have. So, on that note, let's go be wise.
yes.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Matthew.